Chinese President Xi Jinping is also expected to deliver what he calls a peace speech tomorrow. We've got a very special panel here on ambassadors, to mark 1 year of Russia's war on Ukraine. British High Commissioner Susanna Goshko, French Ambassador Michel Miraillet, German Ambassador Sabine Sbarwasser, and Polish Ambassador Witold Jelski. Thank you all for joining me. High Commissioner, I'd like to start with you. This week we saw some developments where Beijing and Moscow say they're deepening their strategic partnership. The U.S. and NATO expressed concern about China potentially supplying Russia with weapons. Does the UK share that concern? Where are you on that?
Well, I think our view on China is straightforward. China should use any influence that it has over Russia to persuade Russia to respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and to act in line with its responsibilities as a member of the UN.
Ambassador Miraillet, Chinese President Xi is expected to deliver what he's calling a peace speech on Friday. Meanwhile, Beijing is accusing the West of making the conflict worse. So what do you make of China's game here?
But I think we have to listen to them. But I mean, we don't expect too much because it's always the same line. And one of the problems we may have now is that Beijing is developing as change. You know, they were not happy with the risk, and now we can see that. I mean, they've changed a bit in that way. But they remain for them. Russia, the Russian system is of terrible importance. They don't want a failure of this Russian system, so that's why they're so adamant to try to help. But they don't like that conflict, definitely.
Okay, so Ambassador Sbarwasser, then on the one hand, we have China and Russia deepening its strategic relationship. On the other hand, it is rolling out this peace plan of sorts that we have yet to see. I mean, do you see any way that China could put something out that would be palatable for Ukraine and its allies?
Well, on the one hand, it's good if China feels responsibility for world peace as member of the G5. At the same time, if you want, we have a peace plan. The Charter of the United Nations very clearly says what the principles are that need to be followed in its territorial integrity, its sovereignty, and freedom of being attacked, so a prohibition of the use of force. And that is what China, if China puts that forward, that would be good.
So, Ambassador Jelski, I wonder what your concerns are if China may be moving closer to Russia. I mean, this war is right on your border. And so how do you view it from Poland's perspective?
One thing for our Chinese colleagues is to be on the right side of the history, but there is also a very practical element, and Chinese are very practical people, and it is a business element. The Chinese have been building the connections, trade connections to Europe, and Europe is very important for China. The deliveries through Belarus, deliveries through Ukraine and other areas from the east to European Union are simply difficult because of what Russians have caused. So I think it is very much in the interest of our Chinese friends to stay on the right side of the history.
High Commissioner, do you think that's enough of a deterrent, the economic ties, the threat of sanctions, the warnings from the United States to keep China sort of out of this in a way that would be negative for Ukraine?
Well, I would hope so. What we need to do is call upon China to act as a responsible member of the international community, as my German colleague has said, and respect its UN obligations and encourage Russia to do so.
Okay, High Commissioner, second topic, I guess, question for you. Ukraine is looking for fighter jets. When they wanted tanks, Britain led. Will you lead on jets?
Well, the Prime Minister has said, he said when President Zelensky was in the UK, that he's asked our Defence Secretary to look into what we can do on jets. But our response to Ukraine is fundamentally based upon three principles. The first is that we're trying now to speed up our provision of immediate military assistance so that Ukraine is strong enough to face down any Russian spring offensive, because we think that provides the best chance for a swift end to the war. But once the war has concluded, Ukraine will need to be in a position to defend itself going into the future. And so we have said, for example, that we will train Ukrainian jet fighters so that Ukraine is in a position moving forward to defend its own skies and to be on a stable and a path to peace that it's able to project for the future.
But Ambassador Miraillet, I know President Macron hasn't ruled out sending fighter jets, but he says he is worried about the risk of escalating the conflict. How would supplying yet the next level of military equipment escalate? What's the concern there?
No, the concern is just to see, the picture is very clear. We need to help Ukraine to win that war, full stop. The question of escalation is just a question where, we may passed a threshold where, I mean, we have this nuclear threat from the Russians, I mean, where we may have some different perception of it. But today, I mean, as you mentioned it, President Macron is still considering it. I mean, but we have a problem. We have, as my British colleague said, we have to act expeditiously. And you don't train a pilot jet from a Russian system to a Western one like this. You need weeks, even months. And this is the problem we are facing. And that's why, for example, Poland took the very clear decision to get rid of its old MiG-29. They can use immediately. So the threshold to cross, I mean, we know that, 1 year ago, nobody would have think a second that we could be in a position to send hundreds of tanks, main battle tanks, or air defense, modern air defense systems to Ukraine. That's what we are doing now. I mean, we are pushing the Russians. We need to help Ukraine, and we will do it. We will continue it to do it. The price to pay, we will see. But I mean, the path is very clear.
Ambassador Sparvasser, we've sort of seen this pattern throughout this where Ukraine says it needs a certain level of help, there's a resistance and a reluctance, and then eventually the need is met. We saw that with tanks, with air defense systems. Do you think we're simply going to see that pattern repeat itself and fighter jets will eventually end up in Ukraine?
Well, I think what has been very clear for all of us is we're totally in uncharted territory. We do want to give Ukraine all the help that we can in order to have it withstand that Russian assault. At the same time, we do want to do everything in lockstep with our allies, do it in a way that makes our resolve very clear, but also avoids escalating too much. And there's the practical problem that Michel just mentioned. Fighter jet training is very complicated, takes a long time. Germany, for example, now on the Leos, on the main battle tanks, is training very fast and has made a massive effort to send those Leo 2 to Ukraine, but also to speed up the training. So all of these things have to happen and be decided step by step, but mostly together with allies.
So, Ambassador Jelski, the practical limitation of training isn't there with the existing MiGs that Poland still has. And I know President Duda said he is willing to maybe send MiGs even earlier if the U.S.-led coalition also agrees to send fighter jets. I mean, what does it take to get to the point that your older MiGs can maybe be used in Ukraine?
Well, as you know, Poland has been on the lead on many of those topics in our internal conversation. We operate within unity, and this is very important, but discussions are taking place, and that's good, and we achieve quite a lot with those discussions. In terms of fighter jets, this is an ongoing discussion. The position, as you mentioned, of Poland is as it was a couple of months ago, because this is not a new conversation. Is that we'll be happy to provide and join, but in the allied formula. The conversation on fighter jets is a little bit more complicated than other elements of military equipment. However, I would say that the saying "sky is the limit" does not function here.
No, obviously. But, High Commissioner, I spoke with Petro Poroshenko earlier today, and he made the point that, in his view, Ukraine has enough to hold off the Russians, but it doesn't have enough to beat the Russians right now with the way things have evolved on the battlefield and with the losses that they've already had to their military and to their society. So, I mean, we're a year into this, right? And we have this sort of stalemate situation. I mean, can there be an end to this in 2023 without an even greater escalation in the military capacity of Ukraine?
Well, the easy answer to that is that there's an end to this at any point that Putin decides to withdraw his troops.
Absent that, though.
But it's becoming increasingly apparent that until he realises that he can't win on the battlefield, he's not going to be in any position to negotiate. So our view on this and our approach is to make sure that we're speeding up the delivery of our military assistance to Ukraine so that Ukraine is equipped to easily stand down, or to stand down as quickly as possible, the Russian troops, so that Putin reaches that decision swiftly, so that we don't prolong the suffering of the Ukrainian people.
Ambassador Mireille, we are going to get this plan from China, tomorrow. We don't yet know what's in it, but
we know.
Pardon me?
I think we know. It's always the same song. We heard for the last three or four years. I mean, it's the old policy from the Weijiaobu. I mean, with the same languages. It will not. I would be very surprised to see new trends or new proposals from the Chinese.
But even if they were to come up with some new plan and move the ball forward in a way that President Zelensky could show some interest in it, if Russia's still in Crimea, if it's still in the Donbass, if there are still Russian troops anywhere inside Ukrainian territory, do you see a way to some sort of a peace as long as that situation exists?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we have been very clear. I mean, it's to the Ukrainian government, to the Ukrainian people, to decide what kind of peace settlement they are looking for. And for the moment, I mean, the way you describe it is certainly not, I mean, what they expect and what they want. And one more time, I think that we have the Western community is really behind Ukraine. And if we have to wait 1 year, I mean, we will have to wait. And the question of support is not only a question of military support, notably in ammunition, but it's also in bringing, I mean, maintaining the economy, helping the Ukrainians to repair, I mean, their energy infrastructure and to support this economy. And it's a huge, also, I mean, the European Union put 50 billion euros in that plan. So we'll continue. Half of it, more or less, has been spent already, but we will have to continue to do that.
Right. So, Ambassador Sparvasser, I'll be the unofficial ambassador from Canada at this table. We're all democracies, right? And when our leaders are out of favor, they leave. Dictators don't have retirement plans. If Vladimir Putin continues to fail in Ukraine, what worries do you have about how he might escalate this conflict next? There's a nuclear threat, the pulling out of the SMART treaty this week. How far do you think he might be prepared to go?
Well, that's speculation, but most experts say that a nuclear threat is far-fetched. It still is something that has everybody worried. This is, as I said, uncharted territory. The first time you have a war of aggression of a nuclear power in Europe. And so this is a real concern and needs to be a real concern. What we need to see is what Michel just said. We need Russia to see that it is losing on the battlefield and then really accept a political settlement, but not one where Ukraine is pushed into a ceasefire that then breaks out into another horrible war, but one that is fair and equitable and acceptable.
Ambassador Jelsi, do you think we're close? Do you think we're close to that point with Vladimir Putin? I know it's difficult to get a read on the guy. We don't have free press inside his country, but the level of punishment inflicted on his country economically and militarily, do you think we're anywhere closer to the point where he might come to that realization?
Poland has a very difficult history with Russia, and we know that only the language of force works with Russian autocrats. So this is, as my colleagues mentioned here, this is the only methodology that we can apply. Putin is not a strange construct for Russia. This is a construct which is in a very solid manner based in interests of Russian bureaucrats, Russian business, and unfortunately also Russian common population that believe in big Russia. So it's not that Putin is a crazy person that suddenly will go away. No, he's supported by at least those three very important elements, and the elements which are sort of opposing him are unfortunately at this point insignificant because they are intelligentsia, middle class from large cities, and they have very little influence. So he's not a crazy person. He operates within a certain framework, and again he wants us to stay in the formula of a proxy war, of a frozen conflict. This is something that he would appreciate. We cannot allow this to take place.
Where do you think the opposition needs to come from domestically for it to make a difference, moving it outside of the intelligentsia and the others?
Allies from the West, NATO countries, worked with Russia and the Russian opposition for a number of years in all the possible formats, and many of us believe that there is progress achieved. Unless Ukrainians win this war, and everybody understands that they won this war, there is no space for the democratic forces in Russia to prove their point.
Okay, I want to thank you all for coming in. This is a rare opportunity for us to have four people in your role all together at the same time, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.